Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar session for Businesswoman Association in partnership with SEDA. I am Nomzamo Ngulana Kasana. I am the chairperson of the BWA Western Cape branch. It has been a long time since we interacted. Life under lockdown is a challenge to all of us. It is. But what I am going to say to you, all of you out there, we need to keep going. We need to keep strong because this too shall pass. I am joined by Beverly Hancock, the deputy of the BA in the Western Cape branch. She is going to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Beverly.
Thanks, Nomzamo, and hi, Roger. Right, lovely to see everyone here today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Roger Hitchcock, a senior partner with Sadar Group. Roger really leads the education programs across Africa and the Middle East for the Sadar Group, and he also supports clients with his strategic and facilitation expertise. Roger really is passionate about helping organizations and individuals find their own clear strategic direction and purpose, which is really an area we're going to be addressing today through what we're going through, and to help take steps to really implement the strategic direction in an effective way. What I love about Roger is that we often ask what impact does being part of a Businesswomen's Association like the BWA, what value is there from it? And Roger will probably tell you himself, he actually grew up in a family where his mom used to talk about her women's association, Businesswomen's Association, so often. So Roger, I'm so pleased that you've actually grown up with this and understand. It was actually just before the Businesswomen's Association was amalgamated from the three, yeah?
It was exactly. I grew up with the acronym BPW, Business and Professional Women's Club. I had a mom who actually grew up in Zimbabwe, previously obviously Zimbabwe, and her mom was very involved. And so we even did things like putting BPW newsletters in envelopes, etc., etc., etc. It was a few years ago.
A few, but it's wonderful, and it just goes to show the impact and the lasting impression that an organization like this has. So Roger, thank you so much. We're going to hand it over to you. Any questions? Certainly we have a Q&A at the end, don't we?
We do.
So, absolutely. So please take it away, Roger.
Good. Thank you, Bev, and thank you so much, Nomzamo, and thank you, BWA, for the invitation and the opportunity of presenting. Possibly the way forward, if Bev and Nomzamo, you want to turn your cameras off, then at least it does help with bandwidth. And those of us, you know, we're all getting quite good at this Zoom thing. As Bev said, I'm a senior partner with a group called the Sadar Group, and our role is essentially to work in the boardroom with decision makers, senior leaders in organizations. We do work with a whole range of businesses. We work, you know, with right through from some of the largest companies to family businesses, right through to all kinds and all, you know, all sizes and all structures of businesses. As Bev said, I'm very involved in the education of directors and boards. And so my life in lockdown has effectively been what I'm doing right now. A lot of the programs we run, I've been running online. And also done a number of different webinars. So as we go through, what I suggest a few ground rules. I do have in front of me the Q&A box. So you'll notice that there's a Q&A function on your taskbar. In Zoom, you can always drop me a question, or you can use the chat box. I have both of those in front of me all the time, and we'll be monitoring those as we go. So there will be a time at the end, but certainly if during the course of the next hour or so I say something and you want to query it or dig a bit deeper, I'm happy to engage and interact. We are talking about, you know, we're in a major crisis, and I don't want to spend a lot of time dwelling on the crisis, because I want to, you know, really start saying, what do we look for coming out of it? Nomzamo, I loved what you said, this too shall pass. And it's a phrase that I think more and more people are starting to to grasp onto, because as things move forward, it's really something we need to look to and say, well, what does this look like on the other side? And part of it is really digging deep in our companies, and we call that rediscovering your true north. Why you exist, where you know, what you hold on to, so that when we look forward, and as the path becomes a little bit clearer looking forward, we can start unpacking some of the things to do. Two quotes that I want to just position what I want to talk about is that there's a critical need in organizations for clear leadership. We are getting so many voices from all over the place. And one of the things in our organizations is we need to be careful is maybe the wrong word, but clear. We need to be definitive about our leadership in our organizations. And those of you who are leaders in organizations, sometimes we have to bolster ourselves up and step forward. But what the world is looking for, what our teams are looking for, what our people are looking for is leadership. And I love this quote, that the very essence of leadership is that you have a vision. You cannot blow an uncertain trumpet. And I think one of the challenges we have is with all of the noise in the environment, and I'm not denying that there is, I'm just saying we need to be in our companies the voice that people listen to, and the people that our teams look for. No matter whether your team is tiny or your team is massive, ultimately people are looking for leadership. And possibly the other bracket on what I want to say here is another quote, and this is another quote about the essence of leadership. And we are going to talk a bit about the essence of strategy and what we mean by strategic thinking, especially in our moments like we're going through now. But this quote I also think is really, really powerful and lays the foundation for the approach I want to take, is that all of the great leaders have one characteristic in common. It was the willingness to confront unequivocally the major anxiety of their people in their time. This, and not much else, is the essence of leadership. And I certainly believe, and I know that anxiety is something that we've all had to grapple with. We're all, even Nomzamo, in your introduction, the challenges that we can allow to overcome us. The reality when we think about companies is, as leaders of companies, whether we are on the board or in senior leadership or in a leadership position, we have these companies whose life is dependent on our decision making. And our decision making is absolutely critical at this time, not just for our people, but also for our businesses. And so with that in mind, in a sense, those two brackets, the clear trumpet, how do we blow a clear trumpet? How do we see into the future when the future is so uncertain, in a sense? And then also, how do we address the anxieties that our people are feeling? And acknowledging both of those, that everything I'm going to say is premised on the fact that this is not an easy time we're going through, and I acknowledge that up front, because that's important. I am an optimist. I do believe we are going through something. I think the challenges, the length of time is obviously going to be substantial, but how do we get through it? How do we rediscover our true north? And the reason I love this picture, and I love, looking up on a clear night, and as we know, some of our nights are clearer than they were before because there's been less traffic and less pollution. But ultimately, it's about seeing into the distance. And so one of the challenges we have, and obviously looking back in time, how have people gained their direction? They've looked at things that are more fixed than they are, and the stars and the landscapes around them were things that they looked for that were fixed. And so one of those key things to think about is to say, where do we start, and what should we do in rediscovering our true north going forward? One comment, Bev, your mic is on, so there is some background noise coming through. And so if we think about the roadmap today, sorry, Bev?
TUB. Have we got another one?
Going forward, what I want to think about is that the roadmap for today is to really think about how do we think strategically. One of the challenges is to really unpack this thinking strategically. What does it consist of? And then I want to provide you with some tools and elements in rediscovering your true north. What we will do as well is we'll also have the video made available to you afterwards. That's why we are recording this, and if you need to go back and pick up on some of the elements, absolutely essential for you to do. And so if we think about thinking strategically, often what happens in our companies is we do a review process, and this is often what we do on an annual basis, or every couple of years we review what we've done in the past, and we want to renew what we do looking forward. But I think in today's crisis, there is an interim step that I like to call reimagine. And so as we go through today, this time we have together, I'd like to provide you with some tools for reimagining, because as we're hearing in the news, some things are possibly going to stay the same, but there's a lot that's going to change. And some of the stuff is going to change in the short term. Some of it is going to change in the long term. And so one of the things we need to do is really reimagine what our business is about, what they address, and why we exist. And so with that in mind, thinking about digging a bit deeper and asking, well, then what then is the essence of strategic thinking? So you've had a couple of quotes about the essence of leadership. So what is the essence of strategic thinking? What are we aiming to actually do and to actually unpack? Is that first thing we need to understand, if we think about the essence, the basic, real, invariable nature of a thing, is the first element of essence and the essence of strategic thinking is what I call diligent diagnosis. And diligent diagnosis is really asking the question, what is really going on here? Because in a crisis like now, we can get swept up in all of the outside news, and all of us are going through something. But a quote that sums this up for each one of us is that, and it's something I came across in the last few weeks, is that we are all going through the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Some people started to say, oh, everybody's going through, we're all in the same boat. But the reality is every single one of our teams is different. Every single one of our businesses is different. Every single one of our network of relationships in our organizations is different and has its own dynamic. And so one of the key questions we need to be asking ourselves as we examine our businesses, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, is what is really going on here? What parts of the business are being impacted and how? What parts of the business are resilient and why? Which parts of the business can we continue, and which parts of the business do we need to pause? And I've had the privilege of speaking over the last 2-3 months to a number of 100 people, run a number of ongoing programs, and it's been interesting seeing the flow of emotion and the flow of business. And some people are experiencing being busier than ever before. And then we need to ask the question, why are we busier than we've been before? What is it about what we're going through? Some people are obviously on the flip side, and they've never been, less busy, and they're wondering what to do. But really understanding, if we diagnose properly, we can treat better. And so that's a question that we need to keep always in the back of our minds as we think about, strategic thinking. We've then got to understand where we stand. And what I mean by that is we've got to look deeper than just our products and services to what underlies our products and services. I often say it's going to the capabilities level of our business, because that's where we move forward from. We've seen examples of businesses that have said, well, we used to transport people, now can we transport things? Hotels that have gone to hospitals. And this is a story out of England where a hotel owner went to the hospital close by and said, we're no longer going to have tourist guests in our hotel, but can we set up an agreement where we house your staff as they are, looking after the people? And I think that's one of the key things we need to think about. Had a couple of comments about the connectivity. We'll monitor that as we go, but really it's understanding here that it's position and perspective. You address the next step in your business from where you are now. You're not another person's business. You're not in another person's situation. We can certainly learn from one another, but the action we take is from where we are now. And then the key thing about strategy, and this is where people often miss the mark in terms of strategy, is that strategy must result in action. If strategy doesn't result in action, and how do we create action in our businesses? We need to create accountabilities, and we do that through the structures and processes that we put in place. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes' time. But it's really asking the question, what can we do that can really make a difference? You know, even, and we have overheard the quotes about never miss a great, the opportunity of a crisis. And some of us look at that and it's frightening because our businesses themselves are in crisis. But if we can look better, look deeper, look further, look more intently at the diagnosis, what's really going on, what do we have available to us, the position and perspective, what are our capabilities, and what can we do that gets us moving and makes a difference to ourselves and to those around us. And so that's the essence and that's the core. And on two other concepts, one is what I call scenario thinking, and it's natural in a crisis for the time horizons to reduce. So what we've seen all over the world is that strategic time horizons have gone from 2025, 2030 to next month. But as we emerge out of this crisis, it's really important to start lifting our eyes and preparing. What a scenario does, a scenario doesn't predict the future, but it creates what I call here a rough timetable for future events. What do we anticipate happening? What are some of the trends we see happening, and what could that result in? And some of us, it's going to be the complete redesign of our business. Some of us, it's going to be protecting parts of our business and building from there. Some of us, it may even involve distributing our business, taking it apart. I mean, there's a whole lot of things we need to think about, and it's exploring the range of possible choices. So scenario thinking helps us unpack a range of futures, looking at a range of opportunities that lie ahead so we can determine what to look for in the present and what decisions to make in the present. Because that's the key thing about strategic thinking, is it must augment and inform our decision making now. All of us have to make decisions in the next day, the next week, the next month, because it's only when we start moving that we can test the choices going forward. And I'll revisit that concept in a bit. But this is linked, scenario thinking is linked to a really powerful governance concept, and that's the governance role of leaders. And the leaders, in a sense, are strategists and governors. They need to know where they're going, and they need to put in place the systems to get there. And governance comes from a very powerful word, and there's a very powerful picture in the word governance. And that is that a governor is the pilot or captain of a ship. It comes from the Greek word kubernetes, meaning to steer or pilot a ship. The Latin was gubernere, was to direct, to rule, to guide. But ultimately, the one thing that the captain of the ship has to keep in mind is the destination. What lies between us and our destination changes all the time and has changed radically. But what we need to be doing is saying, let's keep the destination in mind. And maybe the destination is now going to take longer to achieve, but it's about not losing sight of the future, but understanding that we do need to still navigate between now and then, which means the pathways we'll look for are different. The routes we'll look for are different. The type of capabilities in our business may be very different, but it helps us recognize that we're still on the way somewhere. And that, I think, again, relates to that comment of the introduction. We will get, this is something we'll get through, and we believe very much in the through aspect of strategic thinking. And that leads me to the third foundation stone. So there's this reimagining, there's this essence of strategy, there's this concept of captain of the ship and thinking about the destination and the scenarios that lie ahead. And then there's a concept that I really believe is important, and it's called, it sounds a bit conceptual, but it's called liminal thinking. And what the word liminal means, it actually comes from the Latin word again for, and I'm good at Latin words, for threshold or doorway. And the threshold is something that we move through. A threshold is not something we stay at. And so in thinking about the future, we have a destination in mind, we have scenarios that we can explore, but it's about saying, well, to get there, there are various transitions we need to think through. And transitional spaces are not always comfortable spaces. They're things like this, a stairwell, always moving, always dynamic in a sense, but it's not a place you will stay. I used to travel a huge amount to various parts of Africa every single month. And I used to say that an airport is a very liminal space because there are always people going through it. I always used to say that I think an airport would be probably one of the weirdest places to work because everybody is going somewhere except you. And that's the challenge with liminal spaces, is they can be uncomfortable. They can also be transient because even though, you know, sunrises and sunsets can be incredible experiences, they're transient. And this is the important thing, is that we don't want to get stuck in a transition. And so when we're thinking strategically and thinking from our strategy to our actions, the accountability thinking in our business needs to get us through something and not just to it, because we need to move through it. Another transitional space is like a parking garage. And I don't know if you've ever got stuck in one of these. I once had a car break down, or actually it was, I had my keys stolen while I was on a trip. And I had to then get my car towed. And just the way it was parked in a car park took 2 or 3 hours to get it moving. And it was a very weird experience because it's a transitional space. It's not a space of permanence. And what we're going through, and we've used this metaphor at Sadar, that we are going through a blizzard. In other words, the visibility has got very short, but we need to keep moving because ultimately we will move through it. And that's the strategic, you know, optimism that I believe we need to be demonstrating at this time. And so liminal thinking, thinking about the essence of strategic thinking and linking it, is there's a to, a through, and a from. To is based on our approach and preparation. So we can only approach something based on from where we are approaching it. That doesn't, you know, that's not a great sentence, but our position determines the next steps. The through is creating action and accountability in our businesses. And then from, what will things look like on the other side? What are we aiming for? Where are we heading? And with those concepts in mind, I want to spell out a bit of a process for thinking of rediscovering your true north and answering the question, as I said, where should we start and what should we do? And I do encourage you to, and as you take notes, if you have an idea, write it down. Better take away one thing that you can do tomorrow or even this afternoon than just a whole lot of concepts. And so it is the tools and elements. So I want to unpack some of these things in terms of practical tools, elements that will help us go forward. And it does start with looking from the future back. And this is the scenarios concept that I spoke about a bit earlier. It's both a foundation as well as a very powerful tool. And there are two broad ways to think about constructing scenarios. One of those is to start from where we are and move forwards. So future forwards, the second one there, future forwards. You know, that's essentially saying we work into the future from where we are now, or to start from the future and work our way backwards. Now, those of you who've been through a strategic process in the last 6 months or 12 months, what I encourage you to do is to start from your existing picture of the future. Obviously, it could change and some challenges, but don't abandon the thinking you've already put into the future, because the thinking you've already put into the future can still create your momentum. You need to test it, and I'll show you a few things on that. But ultimately, from a strategic thinking and from a leadership point of view, it's better to start with the future and examine the present in the light of the future than the other way around. Because often what happens is if we end up just working our way forward, we end up where we're going to end up by default, instead of actually having a different desired future, especially if we're wanting a significant difference or a change in our business. And believe me, the opportunity of this crisis is that some of us will be able to create things that have never been created before in the way we structure our business, we put it together, we put our teams together, we restructure things. And in thinking about scenarios, we're obviously looking at the trends, but we're also looking at our capabilities. And I always say that everything we have in the business world was at some time thought about by somebody. In other words, nothing we have was by default. Nothing we have in the way we run our businesses, the way everything from finance to machinery to technology works, started as a concept in someone's mind. And this is what we need to be doing. That reimagine concept, that's powerful when we think about scenarios. And what it looks like is as follows, is that ultimately, if we look on the bottom there, there's now and in the future. The thing that ties the present to the future in strategic thinking is what we call our promise or our purpose or our why. First question to answer in your business, especially in this crisis, is why do we exist? Because the chances are that hasn't changed. You may need to think deeper about it than ever before. Remember, this isn't about your products and services. It's about what difference do you want to ultimately bring to the world. It's the why element and the purpose. And there's a lot of thinking about this in the strategic space, in the leadership space, is organizational purpose is becoming critical to engage with. And then based on, the why, we start thinking of scenarios. And so typically in scenario thinking, one would think of 3 or 4 roads or 3 or 4 destinations based on the trends one sees unfolding in the environment around us now, to look at different influences. And there's various ways of doing that. The way to think about it, though, I think in a crisis, and as I've unpacked this with a number of clients, is to say, in a crisis, as I mentioned, horizons do tend to shorten. And the key is the horizon, because the captain of the ship, they may have a picture of the end destination over the horizon, but they do know where to look on the horizon, where they're heading for on the horizon to get to the final destination. But in a crisis, our focus moves more and more to the short term. We need to then create or think about what I call multi-horizons, not just keeping the single horizon in mind, those scenarios that I painted, but almost doing it like this, where instead of it being a single set of scenarios in the future at a certain point in time in the future, it's asking the question to get to possibly our 2030 vision, which could be the last one here, is to say, what does our 2027 vision have to look like? What does our 2023 vision have to look like? And even closer at hand, what is our 6 month? What does the next 6 to 9 months look like? And it's a good debate and discussion to have with your team, is to say, let's paint a picture in our minds. And remember, it's not a prediction. It's a projection of what we think based on what we see. And the whole point is to get us moving, because then when we start moving, we can test some of the assumptions and some of the challenges in the gap between the now and the not yet. So once we've thought about the future, scenario thinking, which is stage 1 of strategic thinking, it's really important to revisit and to relook at where we are in the present. We need to revisit our current business model, because our current business model is what we have available to work with. And our current business model is all of the different elements that we have to oversee and make decisions about. And remember, we can combine them in ways possibly that haven't been combined before. This is where innovation and creativity become a wonderful opportunity. Because how does what we do now move us towards what we see in the future? So it's looking back from the future and asking what exists in the present. What do we have available to us in the present? And so one of the key concepts in this, and here there's a fair amount of information, but I want to unpack this for you and allow you to then explore and go back and pick up on some of these concepts, is we do need to do an assessment process. And even if that is, here we're not necessarily talking about a multifaceted, long-term, but ultimately we do need to identify and evaluate what we have and what we can watch in the present as we move forward. And this would obviously include our leadership team. It's also looking for what I call the leading triggers in our business, or the leading indicators in our business. And those would be in the areas of finance, systems, and people, which is what our business model ultimately is about. Because ultimately, if we want to know we're moving forward, it's better to look at indicators that tell us where we're going and not just where we've been. And so a couple of principles there, if we're looking for leading indicators, as I said, something that will tell us where we're going is firstly in our business flows. So if we understand the flow of our business from beginning to end, whether we call it the value chain or the business flow or the business management systems, it's asking what are the earliest inputs that we can start monitoring, because inputs are better than outputs or outcomes. It's important to obviously assess what comes out of our business in terms of value, and maintain that. But from a future orientation, we want to monitor at an inputs level, because we want to find the earliest possible measure in our business. And this is often we fall into the trap of saying, well, this is difficult to measure itself. And so in thinking about indicators, and that's why measures may not be the best word, but indicators in our business, there's always this mix of qualitative and quantitative. And obviously the quantitative is the numbers. The qualitative is the stories and the accounts. And so it's the mix of facts and feelings. And as I said, one of the challenges of leaders is to address unequivocally the anxiety. What we need to be doing with our teams is asking them for not just the things that they believe indicate what's going to happen, the measurables and the things we can see around us, but also what are they feeling about that? What are they sensing? And as I said, I've had the privilege of listening to a number of people account briefly and recount what they're going through. And I'm seeing two interesting trends in different parts. Is that there is one trend where people are just getting tired of the time. And I think we're all in that. We're all recognizing that what we thought a month ago, 6 weeks ago, was going to be a quick, hop, skip, and a jump, and we'll be back to normal. We're realizing that, number one, we've been in something for longer than we possibly anticipated, and we will be. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, so there's been a dip in a sense and here I'm talking about the feelings, a dip in terms of emotion often. People are less excited maybe than they were, but they're also deciding to just get on with it. Even this morning, I had a couple of people just say, well, we've just decided we need to get on with what we can get on with. In a sense, stop the pause button, because a lot of what we've been doing in the last 6 weeks has possibly been a kind of a holding pattern. We need to break out of our holding patterns and move forward. So I was asked in terms of thanks, Debbie, for the question about it, an input indicator. So the classic example of that is in our sales funnel. We wouldn't be wanting to measure closed sales. We want to be measuring where the sale comes from. That could be a lead. It could be a website query that we get, depending on our business model. Obviously, in our manufacturing, it's the earliest. So if we are seeing a dip in our inputs, it's obviously going to have an output one. From a business flow point of view, if your business is based on contractual arrangements, maybe the earliest indicator there is the length of the contract you can secure, because if that starts to dip, that in the future it's going to lead to either you need to get more contracts, or it's going to lead to other challenges. If you can maintain your contract flow, then obviously that's gonna get you through it. And it's also linking those indicators, because the indicator by itself doesn't count. It's understanding what the indicator means in the flow through of your business. I trust that's been helpful. In terms of a very powerful tool that I often use and often refer to in analyzing what we have available to us is this thing called the Business Model Canvas. It's available. You can Google it and you can get it. The reason the writing is so small is because this actually is an A1 poster that can be used to think about your business. But if we think about it and break it down into the ideas or the elements, we can say, well, there's this value customer link, which is I like to call it the front office, or in theater, this is what the audience sees. This is what they are participating in. It's the visible parts of our business. It's the people that that have value in what we offer, and so that's the link between the value proposition and the customer. But there are two really important elements that I think we can re-look at in today's environment. Is each one of our customers has a different type of relationship with us based on what our product is and our services. If you just sell an off-the-shelf product, I mean, most of the groceries in our house, the relationship I have with the provider is mediated through the grocery store. There's no direct relationship. On the flip side, where I have contracts with providers, I have a longer term relationship. It changes. It's a different kind of relationship at the end of the day, between myself as a business or as a customer and the business that I deal with. And this is a critical thing, because some of this is going to change significantly, especially those of you who rely on face-to-face in the way that we have done it before. There's going to be a change in channel. There could be a change in relationship. And so it's picking up on the elements that need to be thought about in terms of the front, as I said, front stage, looking at how we construct the value proposition, which obviously lies in the middle, is that there are various partners that we work with. There are assets that we have available. And so there's those elements, and there's the other ones, the activities and the people. So the four elements at the backstage, in a sense, of our business model are, activities and assets and people and partners. And the way that we combine those is how we create our value proposition. And obviously, as value has changed or been modified in the minds of our consumer, we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we amend our value proposition to actually be valuable to the customer going forward? And obviously the flow at the bottom, if we don't have both the front stage and the back stage in place, we don't have a flow of funds through the business. And I know some of us, that's one of the biggest challenges in our business. So examining where we are is important. Once we've examined where we are, we can start exploring the pathways or the transitions forward. Because we have this picture in our mind of what our horizons look like. We have a clear understanding of what we have available to us. And remember, I said earlier, this isn't our products and services, it's the capabilities that lie underneath our products and services. Because some of us, our products and services will change because the value proposition will need to change ultimately. But it's drawing a path or a set of pathways, again, in a sense, less clear. So this is, I've drawn that arrow with dotted lines because this is something that is based on, and it's based on a number of different things. It's based on our assumptions and expectations. And so when we are thinking about the pathway forward, we do need to identify and examine our assumptions and expectations and ask the question, well, what is this pathway based on? Is it based on assumption? If we can identify the assumption, we can test the assumption. It becomes one of those things. Remember I said right at the beginning that it's that movement, that action enables us to gain momentum and movement, and then we can test whether our assumptions work. Some of the assumptions we make will only be tested as we step forward. Same with expectations. These are things that we have built up over experience. In the gap, there are also accelerators and inhibitors. So there are things that move us forward, and there are things that prevent us moving forward. And possibly the most powerful metaphor I saw in an article the other day was that this is why the surfer, when they go to the beach, and especially if it's a new beach, they don't go straight into the water. They'll stand and watch. And, so they're not zoning out, they're not getting into the Zen zone, whatever it is, but they are actually watching. They are looking for the currents. And so in the times we're going through, it's really, really important to take some time and look at the currents, but the currents that are relevant to your business. What are you seeing out there about opportunities? What are you seeing there? What currents can you get into that can take you where you want to go? What currents can inhibit you from moving forward? Because as you know, when you've been in the sea, you can swim as hard as you like against the current and you will not move anywhere. But you get into another current, you don't have any effort and it can take you where you want to go. So those are the two primary things, the assumptions and expectations, and clustering those, identifying those, and then also accelerators and inhibitors. And then obviously in the space, there are a few other things. Are there things you can leverage? Maybe the technology you have in your business is something that can leverage you, because in today's world, technology is going to be a big one going forward. But it's not necessarily the wow of technology, it's actually the functionality. The reason I can speak to you like this is it's not so much the wow, but it's just an incredible set of functionality that I can be talking to you from where I am in Pretoria, and you're probably scattered all over the place and primarily in the Western Cape. And we work in Sadar. We have the privilege of being able to, I've talked to people in Kenya and Ghana and the UK and Dubai on a week-by-week basis. Certainly better than getting in an aeroplane and trying to go there, certainly today. And so that really is this concept of the gap between where we are now and where we want to be. Looking at those pathways and spelling them out. And then what we do with those pathways is we start identifying key markers on the pathways, what I call waypoints and features. So what should we look out for on our way forward? And it's taking the pathway in a sense, and it's breaking the pathway up into different chunks or transitions. And this is where the concept of thinking liminally comes in, is that ultimately we're looking for the key thresholds, and maybe the first threshold you have in your business, having come through the crisis, and as the future starts emerging, is maybe you realize that the most important thing for you to do is to reconsolidate your team. That could mean, unfortunately, laying off certain people, maybe reskilling people. I would opt for the latter before the former, but maybe it's saying, actually, based on the future, what do people need to know how to do and how to work together? Maybe it's actually facilitating a you know, a training session and a discovery session to say, well, let's look at how do we change our communication channels in the business. And so we've felt that discomfort of, you know, inability to communicate, you know, as freely as before. We're all going through the same storm, as I said. Maybe it's technology. Maybe you realize that your technology backbone is not quite what it needs to be. An example that came out of a Ghanaian bank, a client we have in Ghana who sits on the board of a bank, said that within the first 30 days of lockdown, their online banking tripled. And what it did is it was in one sense incredible for them, but it created a massive stress on their security systems. And they'd never anticipated that increase in growth. But it showed that their first transition to move forward was to go back to the, you know, base of their technology and build that base. And so it's looking for what are the thresholds relevant to your business. Okay, what things lie between you and where you need to get to? So what are the things you're aiming for? You still have your mountain, you still have your summit, you still have your vision, the scenarios that you're aiming for. And what does it take to go through it? And the reason I use a set of waves as a through is because the seashore is a transitional space, and it's not always a comfortable space. But it's something we need to work out. How are we going to get through this thing? There's a specific strategy. Going to the surfer metaphor, the surfer knows how to get through waves because actually they need to catch them on the other side. Could be climbing, and we use climbing a lot because, you know, one of our key metaphors is mountaineering. The Sadar is a lead Sherpa in a mountain expedition, so that's why we use climbing. But it's not about the climb; it's about the summit. It's about getting to the top. And part of that is then going from our assessment phase that we've spoken about now and asking the architecture phase. So this is where we actually are thinking ahead. We are planning out, we're architecting the way forward. And this is the opportunity to pause, to think, to reflect, and then to design. And I think and it's interesting because it's actually one of the words working in boardrooms for the last 2 or 3 years that has become used quite often is this word design. That our policy frameworks are not just cut and paste, but they're designed to deliver strategy. The performance frameworks that our people need to work with are designed, and if they're designed well, they deliver what they need to deliver. And part of the design process or the architecting process is also to engage appropriately as broadly as possible. And so the shift in thinking moves from just the board CEO, CFO, and the senior team, often in the assessment phase, to all internal and external stakeholders that we can value and build value in the relationships with. Because a team design approach or a design team approach is better than 1 or 2 people trying to figure it out. It does 2 things. It gets more ideas onto the table. If it's well facilitated, it can get through that and to some really powerful solutions fairly quickly. What it also does is it gets buy-in. And part of the architecting process in our business should be to get as much buy-in to the process as possible as we redesign our policies and our processes and our systems. And so there's this combination in business, this combination of 2 key elements in the performance of our business. So the performance of our business comes from 2 parts. And if we put it on a continuum, as I have there's the systems in our business, and the systems going through the crisis, we may need to look at, redesign, reevaluate, and that's our business model, unpacking the elements of that. But obviously a critical part of our business is people. And a well-designed combination of systems and people, or people and systems, the right people in the right systems, is where our performance comes from. And what tends to happen is as our businesses go through crisis, our systems could become less relevant, which means we rely more on the people. But then as we move into the future, we need to systematize appropriately, not bureaucracy, but well-designed systems, so that our performance, because a mature business tends to rely more on its systems for performance than people, because then people can actually do what people do best. And that's deal with the anomalies, deal with the exceptions, address the decision-making that is required as we move forward. And it's where people fit into the equation, coming towards the end where we create accountability. And this is a critical part. So we've gone from the picture of the future, the scenario, the range of scenarios, the multiple horizons, to the assessment of the present. What are we capable of in the present? Between that, there is a gap. And that gap is where we find the pathways, where we explore the pathways, and we lay them out, we describe them, we put them on paper, we draw them on our flip charts or on our whiteboards or on our office walls at home, if that's where we're doing the work. Because when we do that, we can identify the assumptions, expectations. We can then start to break that path into different thresholds and elements, where going forward, we know that the first thing leads to the second thing, leads to the third thing, and those series of thresholds we need to pass through. But ultimately, action sits with people. And so this is where we go from the waypoints, when we spoke about markers and the pathway, to milestones and measures. And this is where we must identify, well, what must we do or accomplish or achieve? By when? To know that we're moving towards our vision and fulfilling our promise. And as mentioned, if our horizon has shrunk to the next 9 months, to the end of the year, that's absolutely fine, as long as we know where do we need to be by the end of June. Where do we need to be by the end of September, so that we have an opportunity to achieve where we expect to be by the end of the year? What does it look like? What are the indicators as well? And again, I prefer the word indicators to measures, because measures can too often become something we punish people with. Whereas actually, when you're traveling to somewhere, you look out for those, you pass the milestone. The milestone doesn't tell you how far you've been. It tells you how far you still have to go. And so it's always encouraging, as you get closer and closer to the objective or the vision, you should be gaining motivation, and often the way we deal with measures does the opposite. And what that looks like, ultimately, it takes our pathway that we've broken into thresholds, and it starts dropping specific people. The wrong word dropping, but it starts linking people to the thresholds, people to the actions, people to the accountability in the business. And whether your team is tiny and it's 5 of you, or whether it's 5,000 of you, ultimately, this is a critical part of strategy and execution. Often we think strategy is the future, but actually strategy is moving into the future. And moving into the future starts with a picture of the future. Secondly, we have an assessment of the present. We think of the way forward, and then we actually hand out accountability for what has to happen through our policy framework and job descriptions and delegations of authority as we go. So more formally, what it looks like, once we've done the assessing and the architecting, we do the activating. And I'm obviously coming towards an end, and I'd love to have any questions or comments as we go in the Q&A box or the chat box. But it's activating, where ultimately what we're doing is we're doing 2 things. We're initiating action. We're creating accountable action. The things need to be actionable at the end of the day, and the whole team gets involved, whether it's, I call it the governing and managing team. The governing team is the board, the custodian of the strategy and the policy. The managing team is the operations of the business. And so there's this collaboration, this interdependence to achieve what we need to achieve. And if we do it well, then we build trust. And so the link to creating trust is what I call disclosure. So when people are given action to do, and they are reporting appropriately on that action and disclosing how they've exercised their authority, they've achieved their objectives or the interim threshold, it creates trust and it builds momentum in the business. And as we move into this part, it's a couple of key principles that underlie activation, or activate principles, is that firstly, going back to the picture of the captain of the ship, destination is more important than direction. And the reason I say that is there are always a number of paths to get to the same destination. In a sense, what we've gone through, if we use another metaphor, is we've been going somewhere and we've hit a massive traffic jam. And what does our Google Maps or whatever GPS system Waze start to do? It starts looking for alternative pathways. It doesn't change the destination. The destination stays the same, but it starts saying, well, if you turn off here and you take this other route, it'll be quicker based on what you're facing in front of you. Or if you take this other route. And often when we look at those devices, it's amazing how they've actually worked out a range of different options. You see, if we just think direction is from the present forward, whereas destination is leading from the future to where we are at the moment. And in a crisis, we may need to try different things. We may need to take a turn off and go somewhere and test that as we go and maybe get back. And there may be a little bit of, toing and froing as we find our way out of this blizzard or this crisis that we're going forward. But the way we do that is we keep the final destination in mind, and we think multiple horizons. We think, well, as we move forward and 3 months into the future, we revisit our horizons and we push those out. So eventually we can start pushing that strategic horizon back to the medium term where it belongs, back to the real horizon. And then quite an important concept, and I've seen it in business, that often when we start doing something, we want to make sure that we start in the right direction. And so obviously destination and direction linked, but often we think we don't want to move until we're in the right direction. Whereas actually, so the metaphor here I use is, if my car is parked facing the wrong direction, I'm not going to turn it around unless I get it moving. And the chances are I'll have to move it in the wrong direction a few times as I, either get out of that tight parking spot or turn it around. The reality is often we move in the wrong direction first. I was encouraged years ago by someone who said to me, when I felt my life was going in the wrong direction, he said, Roger, remember that the bigger the aeroplane, the longer it has to move in the wrong direction before it takes off in the right direction. And I think that's what we're facing in today's crisis it's gonna look like it in many ways, that we're heading in the wrong direction. But as we move forward, whatever direction we're moving forward, and we keep our destination in mind, we can then test those decisions we make on an ongoing basis. And that's why I said it's critical to identify our assumptions, identify our expectations, because if our assumptions get tested and we have to change our assumptions, we may need to then change our direction. And so it's me getting in the car and wiggling and jiggling it around until I get it into the right direction to end up at the destination. And so that's a way that I would summarize some of what I've spoken about. It's the review process, the reimagining, and I really encourage you, to take a step back. Create the space you need. And I know that often when we're anxious, it's not easy to do, but if you can do whatever it takes you to do, even if that's just something you do in the 3 hours we can walk in the morning at this stage, then do that. Reimagine your business. Step outside of it for a while and reimagine what it could look like. Reassess where you are now and think of some of those pathways going forward. Do the assessment deeply. Look for those indicators or those triggers, those early indicators. Think broadly and widely and wildly when we architect and as we reflect and design our businesses going forward. Get as many people around the table as possible to do that. And then activate. Get it going, get it moving in your business, because I think that's critical. If we don't take action, then we're never going to know whether we're going to get out of this. We're going to get stuck where we are and not able to move right now. May 2020, when it's been crazy for the last couple of months, let May 2020 be the month of action in your business. And even if it's a small step, as long as it's a step, we can start testing those steps and taking the second and third and fourth and 20th and 50th and 1000th step going forward. So that's what I wanted to, in rediscovering your true north. Those are some thoughts. Love to get any questions or comments. And I know it's been a fair amount. I tend to be accused of trying to get people to drink from a fire hose, but I hope it's given you some food for thought. Nomzamo, I see you've come on again. So any thoughts or questions or comments as we close?
Oh, Roger, thank you very much for speaking to us today. I noticed that there are no questions on the chat box. Maybe let's give them another minute to see if there will be any hands raised to ask questions.
I do see there was one. Was that addressed with, from Debbie Scott? Thank you, Debbie, about providing an example of an input indicator.
Yeah, so we did address that as I went. That's what I spoke a little bit about, the sales channel and that kind of thing. So that popped up a bit earlier. Thanks, Debbie. Jonathan, I just say hi. Are there any questions, Jonathan? And any questions from you, Bev or Nomzamo? While anybody else is, we've got five minutes left. Thanks for that.
I would concur with one of the participants about how insightful this presentation has been, Roger. Your thoughts and experiences are very helpful and invaluable for us right now. I think we needed this. We needed to hear such words, from a person who has been through similar situations.
There's one question, sorry Nomzamo, sorry to interrupt you. There's one question that's popped up from Jonathan. Sales teams and motivation. So what we're finding with sales teams is sales teams are frustrated because the way they sell has had to change. A lot of them are no longer out networking, engaging with people face to face. And what we've got to do is we've got to find ways to encourage them. And remember, the advantage sales teams have right now is that there's really no choice. So clients are actually very open to being, and obviously we've got to fit into their busyness, but we found it when we shifted literally 10 face-to-face programs that I run in a month online overnight. And there was no negativity about it. And I acknowledge that part of it is because we didn't really have a choice. We weren't debating with people. And so that's one of the things I would encourage your sales teams to do, as well as look for alternative ways. So there are the linked, the platforms that we use, that if we engage with people, the social media, the LinkedIn platforms, people, especially as businesses start to look at their own needs going forward, if we can encourage our salespeople to look for those relationships, call it stakeholder engagement or stakeholder mapping in the sales team, it'll help to identify who are the most likely people to buy from us next. And so again, monitoring the trends. I trust that's been helpful. And then obviously it's engaging regularly. And I know we all do get zoomed out in a sense. But it is engaging regularly. People, those regular check-ins, even if you build in a daily or every second day check-in with your team, do things like the virtual coffees. We've even done virtual sundowners once or twice. So things like that are really valuable. People need to know that they're valued even now, because it's very difficult, especially those. So some of your workforces may be in their families, and we need to recognize that. Some of your workforce may be on their own. And so they're going through different challenges at this time as well. I trust that's been helpful. Back to you, Nomzamo and Bev.
Anything from your side before I close?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Roger. Nomzamo, I leave it to you to close. Thank you for an excellent session, Roger.
It's an absolute pleasure. And please
this was excellent. This was excellent, Roger. Thank you very much. I hope the slides will be available for us to circulate to the participants.
I will get those through to you.
To all the participants, thank you very much for attending. Let us all rediscover our true north, because we all have to do that. We really have to understand what's going on right now, and we keep on moving. Thank you, Roger. All the best to all of you. Please take care and keep safe till we meet again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank
you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.